Hello, hello, and welcome to our weekly book club episode here at Homeschool Moms Unfiltered. Okay, now don't panic at the sound of book club. There was absolutely no assigned reading. I promise. We promise. We'll explain in just a second. But first, hi, my name's Amanda, and my fabulous co host is.
Hello, I'm Meagan.
Hey, hey.
And yes, this is our weekly book club episode. We read the book, and you're welcome to read along with us, but it certainly isn't required. You're welcome to tune in and listen to our digest version. Plus, if you're new here, you found us on a great week because we're starting a new book this week, so your timing is perfect. Now, before we tell you the name of the book, we want to remind you that we are a secular and progressive podcast. We do not kick off our episodes with prayers or shout amen when we just can't contain ourselves. So while the title of this book club selection will not initially sound secular to many, we promise it is.
Yeah. So today we are kicking off our discussion of The Belief Book by David McAfee. So this is actually a trilogy of books that we'll be reading in the coming weeks. We're going to spend about 2 weeks per book. That's what we say. We'll see how that works. If you listen to us, you know. So the thing with these books is they talk about religion and gods and beliefs in general from a secular perspective, and they're often recommended when the subject of how to teach our kids about world religions from a neutral perspective comes up.
Yeah. So like Amanda said, these books are often recommended in secular groups. You might be the most hardcore atheistic household out there, but your kids are probably still going to end up asking questions like, who is this Jesus guy I keep hearing about? And P.S., that's the literal wording of one of my kids at one point. Who is this Jesus guy anyway? I keep hearing stuff, right? So,
My kid was like, what is the golden rule? And is it gold for everyone?
Yeah, that's great. Right. My favorite was because we lived in South Florida and it's a very Hispanic community. So Christmas and Jesus and the whole thing, it's like a whole big thing, right? And we were driving one day and my youngest kiddo had seen imagery of Jewish people from back in the day, right? Biblical times, and the way that they dressed and whatnot. And it looked like the way that people in the nativity scenes were dressed. And people would put these huge nativity scenes on their front lawns. And we were driving one day and my kid got so excited. He goes, those people have Jews in a fort on their front lawn. What's happening there?
Jews in a fort. That's spectacular. Yeah. We're just watching Gilmore Girls in our family. And on the show, one of the characters was complaining that her mom wouldn't let her have a Hanukkah bush. And I was like, because she really wanted a Christmas tree. So yeah, Jews in a fort, Hanukkah bush.
That's it.
It's all good.
Jews in a fort. And I was like, what? Have a talk here, my friend. So, yeah. So if you're homeschooling kids who are in tune with current politics in the United States, they might also be utterly and completely confused about the value system, which I use very loosely, of the Christian nationalist majority that is currently running our country, because they might have heard some things about what Christianity is, but then they're seeing it play out in a way that doesn't jive with what they've actually heard Christianity is. And that's confusing for us adults, let alone kids who might not fully understand the situation. Right?
Well, yeah. Why don't we hate the Pope and the priests? I thought that they were good people in Christianity, Catholicism. Like, what?
No, he's an evil communist. Yeah, exactly. So it can be pretty difficult to know how to answer these questions, how to start these conversations, how to give kids these foundations, especially when we talk to adults who have their own religious trauma all wrapped up inside themselves. And they're trying to figure out how to answer these questions and deal with all of that and whatnot. So we're eager to dive into these books and see what advice David has to offer us. So that's it. Today, we're going to be reading the first 5 chapters of the book, but don't worry, they're short. They're super short, super easy to read. This is a nice light book after talking about, neurodivergence trauma. So I think that's my first impression of the book overall, is that it's written for ages 8 to 12. So as an adult, it's enjoyable to read. It's not boring or anything like that. But for most kids, it'll be pretty easy to digest. It breaks everything down into really understandable terminology. The sequence is great. I have the Kindle version, so I don't know what the actual version looks like, but the sketches in it are really cute and engaging and stuff like that. So it's light, it's friendly, it's easy to follow. I read this week's reading in like no time. So it's a nice one. I like it.
Yeah. And I will say that after I read it, I convinced my kiddo, who we sometimes call Winston on the show, I convinced him to read it and talk with me about it, and he agreed that he thought it was easy and that it broke things down well, and he thought that adults would probably be okay with it because not all grown-ups wanna have to really think too hard on things. Sometimes they
That's
wanna be able to ease into stuff, but that it was written in a way that even younger kids could understand where it was going.
Aw, he's so cute. I'm telling you. And if you need a frame of reference, Amanda's kiddo was 11. So that's the age bracket that we're talking about as far as reading level and comprehension and all that kind of stuff. I mean, he's a super smart kiddo, but generally speaking, within that age range, spot on.
Yeah, that's it. And I think if you were doing a read aloud, you could do it with even younger kids.
Yes.
You might need to do a little bit of explaining on certain words. They use examples and definitions and things. But if you were doing it with, 5, 6 year olds, you might have to spend a little bit of time explaining a few things or talking through some things to make sure that they get it. But it's a really accessible book.
Mhm.
All right. So, with all of that said, let's actually dive in. So, the introduction starts on page 1. I love it when an introduction actually starts on page 1. There are no Roman numerals. There's no like on Roman numeral 1. Right. Just good old page 1. So, I actually really like the way the book starts out. And I'm going to open it up and read it. Just give me a second. So, it starts with saying, "What is a belief? Why do we believe some things and not believe others? What is religion? Why do people believe in so many different gods? Just what are gods anyway?" And then they kind of go on to say, these are really big questions with really big, important answers, and that it has changed throughout history. And that's what we're going to talk about. And so I just like the fact that like it's setting the stage, but it's not diving right in.
Mhm. Yeah. And then we get a really nice foundation of information where we get definitions and not in a really awful dictionary type definition sense of it.
Mhm.
There's examples and it's easy to read, but they break down words like believe, God, things like that so that we can, and there's others as we continue to read through where we've got evidence and logic. And so as topics are introduced, you get a really good foundation of what that word means in a variety of ways so that you're super clear on it moving forward concepts, which I love. So,
Yeah, I have the same kind of thoughts on that. I like the definitions. And I feel like, especially these days, there are so many times that like people just don't have the same definitions of words. So this way we know that we're talking about the same things.
yeah, I like it. I think I have the next notes. In the Kindle book, there's no page 4. So I'm not really sure what page I'm on versus what page you're on. But I
Well, I
think,
checked them. Because I typed my notes up second last. I checked them against each other, and so they are in line.
thank you. I do love it when Kindle's just like, we're going to skip 4. It's like in a hotel when there's no 13th floor. It's like, this book has no page 4. Good luck. So, anyhow, the next highlight that I pulled out was on page 5 for me in the religion section under the definition there for religion. And it says, you see, for a lot of people all over the world, religion makes them feel better when they face what we don't really understand about the world, the universe, and pretty much everything. For a believer, their religion is like a nightlight that keeps the monsters in the closet or under the bed away. It makes them feel safe and secure. But when we search for answers to our questions, we gain something called knowledge. Knowledge is everything that we know and understand about the world. It is all the facts and information that we get from living or from education. Dave and Chuck, who are kind of our guides in this book, they're these 2 characters that are introduced at the start of the book. Dave and Chuck don't practice any religions, but they love gaining knowledge by reading about them all the time. And then it says knowledge is like a super nightlight. So you have this comparison that religion was like a nightlight. And it's like, okay, that's there. And that can give you some clarity about things that you don't understand potentially. But then when you understand knowledge from a fact-based perspective, that is a super nightlight that outshines the regular nightlight. And it makes sure that there's a whole lot less of the world that we don't understand. So we see there are no monsters to be afraid of in the first place. And I just thought, I mean, it just reminded me of how many times do we see in movies, or we see it depicted in paintings, people hundreds of years ago when there would be an eclipse or something, and it was this sign from the heavens, or it was a punishment from God or something like that, because they didn't understand what an eclipse was. They didn't understand the solar system in general. And so that to me was what I pictured when I was reading this, where it was like, okay, well, we can use this otherworldly being to explain away things that we don't really understand. But once we have the knowledge to know what an eclipse is, it's like, oh, that's not because some God in the sky was angry at us. That's because of the way the planets move and everything. Oh, I got it. Okay. Now I have the knowledge. So I like that.
Yeah. I think for me, it went even deeper than that. I really pulled out the kind of that middle paragraph in there that says, for a believer, their religion is like a nightlight that keeps the monster in the closet or under the bed away. It makes them feel safe and secure. So I've definitely used similar types of stories and analogies and trying to explain things to my kiddo, because as a non-religious person myself, when I was talking with my kiddo about this specifically, when he read the book this morning and we were talking through it, we were discussing the fact that, like, people who believe in religion, like, they like that because it helps them believe that when their loved one dies, they're not just gone, right? They're going to get to
Hmm.
see them later. So they feel comforted in that. Or that when something bad happens, there's an all powerful being. And so there's a reason for it, there's a purpose behind it, not just the fact that sometimes shit happens and bad things happen. And sometimes life's unfair and then you die. And people who have religion don't really want to view life that way. They're not like, life sucks and then you die. Yay. And you're like, no, God's got a plan.
Yes, we're an eternal celestial family, Amanda.
Yeah, no, not so much. But so I liked this. I thought it was a really good analogy. I thought it like hits stronger than any I had come up with on my own. That said, when I very first read it, it got a red tab. I don't know if you can see my coloring here, but it got a red tab because I thought, "Oh, buddy, there are a lot of people who would be very offended by that analogy."
Mhm.
Hopefully not the people who are using it in the way that we're hoping to. Hopefully they're like, "Oh, that's an interesting way to think about it." But I would guess there are a lot
This
of
book has
people who would.
probably met more than one bonfire for its heretical messaging.
Yeah. I didn't even look at the Amazon reviews. I probably should go read them just for fun.
It'd be good. All
Sure.
right. The next section that we have here is called questions. And it's kind of what we talked about in the opening. It gives some examples of questions that you might get from your kiddos, or that your kiddos might be wondering inside themselves and not verbalizing. It's on page 9 in the print copy, 10 on the Kindle page. Thank you, Amanda. But questions like, where do we come from? Who or what made us? Who or what made the thing that made us? Why are there so many different animals? Why can't we live underwater like fish? Why is the sky blue? I mean, I've talked about the fact that I have a very intense youngest child. And we spent years doing questions like this. It was like mind numbing, because the questions would just come rapid fire like that. And the answers that I had were never sufficient enough. So, yeah, there's plenty of kids that are asking these kinds of questions, and they're not easy ones to answer. So,
Yeah,
the book is great for that.
it's so true. I will say in this section, there's just one little paragraph that says, even you started as a question asked by your mom and dad. They asked themselves and each other, should we have a baby? And the answer was a big yes. And for me, it's that thing. I get the point of it. I was a little disappointed in how much this single little paragraph alienates a whole lot of people raising kids. So if you're going to get the book and you're listening to this, it's on page 10 in the print book, going to be around that in the Kindle book. You might want to just know whether you reword that or make sure you talk about it with your kiddos or whatever. Like there's a lot wrapped up in that one little paragraph.
Hmm.
So, yeah.
There sure is. All right. My next quote is on page 15. And it talks about, once we've had an understanding of how these stories were created, as far as explaining some of these religious principles that are there, and what they were created to explain a way that people didn't understand. It makes a suggestion for our kids to write a story about something that they see or experience around themselves while pretending that they know nothing about it. So, something like, how does corn grow from a tiny little seed into the size stalk that it does and create new corn? And then you can use it the way it is, or you can apply heat to it, and all of a sudden it becomes a big white fluffy thing, right? Like, if you knew nothing about that scientific process, how would you explain that? And how might that come out? So it could be all sorts of things. It could be weather phenomenon. It could be the metamorphosis of caterpillars to butterflies. There's so many different things that you might be able to lead with if kids are struggling to come up with that, and to say, if you didn't understand what this actually was, what sort of off the wall explanation would you come up with to rationalize what you're seeing before your eyes?
Mhm. Yeah. I thought it would be fun. So we live in a big condo building. So we have an elevator really close to our front door. Like, can you imagine what kind of stories a kid could come up with like how like people come out of the door, like it's just a closet and they come out and where'd they come from? And like, yeah, it's
Like
super
somewhat
fun.
Narnia like, right?
Yeah. Maybe that's what it's based off of. Someone who just couldn't wrap their mind around an elevator. So I like the fact that it towards the very end of this chapter, it wraps up with this quote. He just says, "You've just done what your ancestors did. How cool is that? It's really amazing. You just took a look at the world around you, asked a million questions about it, and answered them all with one really great story."
Mhm.
And this works because he's building on things, right? All right. So now, before we get into stories, we just want to take a quick moment to remind you that we have Patreon. If you're not over on Patreon, you totally should be. We have a free member like follow. It's totally free. And you get like an occasional update or email or things like that. We posted information on these books with links and stuff like that for all of our free members, the people who follow us for free. Then there are paid membership levels. There's like a $5 level that just is like, hey, we really appreciate what you're doing. It's kind of like the creator level, right? We support it. We want you to keep doing it. Thank you so much. Here's your subscription that's not a New York Times Atlantic subscription, but we're awesome too. There's a $7 level that gets you the unit study each month and a little bit more information and things from us. The unit study is normally $10 a month. So if you like them and your kiddos are really enjoying them, it's a great value to sign up at the $7 a month level there. So then you get like a 30% discount. And then we also have the VIP and the all access level. They have chat groups that are involved and live events and things like that. All of the details are over there on Patreon. But if you sign up at any level, you'll get details, you'll get updates, and then you can change up or down whatever works at whatever time. We would love to see you over there. It's awesome. You can find it from our website. You can find the link in our show notes. You can just type in Patreon, Homeschool Moms Unfiltered. I think you can find the link in our link tree. Literally, we would love to have you join us. And we've made it as easy as possible to find us. So hope to see you over there.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we have a Patreon live tonight, the day that we're recording this, and it's our social for the month, and I'm super excited for it. So it's going to be great. I'm going to bring a little snickety snack and hang out with the other homeschool parents. It's going to be awesome.
Yeah. Yeah, it will be nice.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. All right. So stories. What do you have first, Amanda?
All right. So the stories chapter starts on page 17. And like I said, it's kind of each one, it flows nicely into each chapter, right? There's a good flow and rhythm. And he's just talking about telling stories and storytellers and the idea that, like, you probably enjoy hearing stories or reading a good book before bed or these kinds of things. And now I know we've talked a lot in our regular podcast about how much I detest read alouds. So in my family, we're not doing read alouds. But my kiddo did really, especially when he was littler. But even now, every once in a while, he'll ask me to tell him a story, and that like made up storytelling on the spot. And especially when he was littler, He would love it when it was a story about him without it being obviously about him, right? Once upon a time, there was a little boy who lived in a great big city and, telling an adventure that he'd been through. But just this idea, a lot of times we think about, in the past and storytellers and oral history and the passing down of information and that kind of stuff. But people still love storytelling and understanding the world through stories. And I don't think we should forget that. Like,
Mhm.
it's important to know its place in history and how we got here, but it's also important to remember and value the importance of storytelling and understanding the world through stories even now.
Mhm. Our version of that was they're not really stories per se, but it was kind of just creative imaginings when we would be driving on the highway. And when you see something on a big flatbed truck and it's a really odd shape and it's covered with like a tarp or something like that. And we would always come up with wacky, like,
Mm.
and I'd just be driving and be like, you guys, what's under that tarp? And the stuff that we would come up with, and we would be cackling in the car, having the best time ever trying to figure out what was under the tarp. And of course, it was always like a hippopotamus who had swallowed a beach ball that was giant, or like, it was like all sorts of stuff. It was just like a minute version of storytelling, but we always loved it. And we still do it to this day. I mean, we'll be driving and my kids will be like, what's under the tarp? I'm like, exactly. So
That's fun.
times.
Yep.
Yeah. So within that same section, I think I have the next quote on page 20, similar to what you were just saying, right? People have used stories to do all kinds of neat things. They've even passed on their best messages and ideas thousands of years into the future. In that way, stories can travel through time. Ancient people wanted to let everyone know exactly what happened in their time long before there was even writing. And stories can do that. Stories have been used by everyone since the dawn of mankind in more ways than we could ever describe. I think that's a really interesting way too to talk about the fact. I've talked about the fact on the podcast before that I had a very religious education growing up. And if you really dissect some of the religious books, like if you look at the four gospels of the New Testament in the Bible, they all talk about similar events, but they talk about them differently and they contradict one another in a lot of ways. And so this is kind of a great way of explaining that. These are stories that were passed down and people remember them differently. And it's like that game of telephone and they morph and they transform. And then somebody wrote them down. And some people believe that that is the actual 100%. We must follow this thing to the absolute letter, but they contradict one another. And it's because of this way that they came to be through this passing down of stories. So it's pretty interesting. There's another little bit further down that says they told stories about who they imagined could have made the world and everything in it. They used their stories to try to answer their questions about life, the world, and everything. And I thought that was interesting because if you were to meet with an indigenous person in the United States, a religious leader from India, the Pope, a rabbi, and ask them, how did the world come to be? They're all going to tell you that their version, most likely, they're all going to tell you that their version is the version, right? This is what happened. This isn't our story of what happened. This is what happened. They're all going to contradict one another. And so that's what it is. These stories that are handed down. It's a great way of explaining it to kids.
Yeah. Yeah. So then just the next page over from that on page 22, there's a quote. So it says, "The stories the ancients told helped make sense of the whole wide world around them and also helped to bring them closer together." And I'm like, okay, yes, I'm picking up what you're putting down. I've got it. I'm there. And then it goes on to say, "A group that knows and believes the same story is a much stronger group." And I have to say that I had never actually explicitly thought this. So I was a little surprised of like, oh yeah, that is very true. And I'm surprised, like, I love a good deep thinking session, right? I'm one of those people. I love to sit around and noodle things and think about things. And so I was kind of shocked that this is the first time this has ever really occurred to me, especially in today's political climate. Like, I really should have thought of this. But yeah, that really hit home for me.
It's true. I mean, I've taught a class for a while now that covers a lot of World War II propaganda. And we look at some of the uniforms that are present, especially in the German propaganda. And we've done a deep dive with students about why do armies wear uniforms to begin with? This wasn't new to the Germans, but they really took it to a whole different level where people were in uniform all the time, even if they weren't working and stuff like that. And it was like, why do people do? Okay, because they evoke sensations of patriotism. They unify the group where everybody's the same because they're all doing like there's power in these symbols that create this
Mm,
unifying atmosphere. And so that's kind of a similar concept, right? Just
mhm.
religious version. So
Yep.
yeah. And then I had a quote on the next page that said, over time, many stories from the past, including some that weren't true, were passed on from mom to dad, to son to daughter for so long that people began to believe them without ever asking questions. Many people started to believe in the stories they were told about the world as children, and for some, even the characters that others had made up became real to them. This is still true for many people today. And so, of course, we're, like you said, Amanda, he's building to it, right? He's
Mhm.
building towards religious figures, whether it's gods, whether it's who is this guy Jesus that I keep hearing about, whether it's all of that. He's kind of building up towards that concept for kids.
Yeah, exactly. I like the way that we're building, right? And so that wraps up that chapter. And then we move on to the next chapter, which is called Beliefs, and it starts on page 25.
Mhm. Yeah. So we both made notations here about the fact that now he's starting to get into evidence and logic and defining those two terms and starting to position them against belief systems. And so he uses a story here to make this example where he says some of our ancient ancestors even believed that the sun in the sky set and rose because a giant man carried it on his shoulders. That's what made sense to them. No one knew any better at the time, so they accepted the stories as fact. They believed them. They believed these things because they were being taught to by not only their parents, but by every other adult around them, too. They were told these stories were true by everyone who they were taught to trust. And so these stories become perpetuated no matter how much logic or evidence they are lacking.
Well, yeah. And for me, the part of that quote, I pulled out the exact same quote. And the part that really struck me is this idea, right? That they were told these stories by people that they were taught to trust. And we know that this is how it works, right? And I think that's why there's so much concern about the amount of religious indoctrination and political propaganda that is really seeping back into the schools, right? In large part, it had been there before. There was a lot of work and effort done to separate those things out. And now we're seeing it, like I said, seeping back into the schools. And this is why people are so concerned, right? Because kids are taught that they're supposed to believe what their teacher teaches them, and if their parents are teaching the same things and their teachers are teaching this, or even if the parents aren't, the kids, they spend more of their waking time with teachers than they do with parents, especially if you're not homeschooling. And so, how do you counteract this? And then also for me, when I was reading this, I was like, man, like, how do I make sure that the beliefs and the values that I'm teaching my child are somehow like better, like, how do you make sure that, like, you know, what you're teaching them is this, like, truly evidence and logic based, and that you're making sure, like, well, we believe that, no human is illegal because of this and this and this, and we believe that trans people have rights because of this and this and this. And how do you make sure that whatever your beliefs are, whatever you're sharing, it's not this kind of twisted, like, well, it's not even true, but it's what we keep sharing and telling. This is
Hmm.
where we get into that. I was saying I like to think these deep things and noodle things that don't have good answers.
Yeah, because everybody else thinks that they're sharing the truth with their child too. So,
Yeah,
mhm.
right?
Yeah, there's very few people that are like, this is some made up story, but I'm going to pound it into my kid's head so that they end up really confused about life. Nobody's really doing it that way. I don't think
No,
so.
no, probably not. Like, this is a total nut job conspiracy theory, but we are going to treat it like it's real because then we'll look like real morons out in the real world.
We'll blend in with all of our neighbors. That's where we're
Yeah.
heading. Right?
Well, yeah, there is that. They just might do. Okay, so that wraps us up. That brings us to the next chapter, which is called Creations. Starts on page 33. And for me, I liked the very first little paragraph it starts off with. It says, "So far, we've discovered that questions lead to stories and that stories lead to beliefs." And then, he's like, "Good, we're starting to get somewhere on the road to religion." For me, I did really like the way that the book was building. I thought it was a gentle way to build for younger kids.
Totally agree.
All right. So then I have the next one too. So it's just on the next page on 34. It says, quote, "But there are other beliefs too, beliefs that are not able to be tested by really smart people, but are believed by many people anyway. These are called unverified beliefs, and they, like all other beliefs, have helped shape the world we now know." Um,
Mhm.
and for me, I was just like, okay, now we're starting to get into some tricky stuff, right? Like, I felt like everything up to now was like, okay, yeah, yeah, I get that. Okay, yeah, yeah. This was the first paragraph that I was like, oh, this is probably where a parent really needs to be like, okay, I'm here. Let's talk
Yeah.
this. Yes.
We're going to need to dig into this a little bit more, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And then I thought it was interesting because he's telling me stories about the man who carries the earth around, and he's got another one about a giant turtle and all of this stuff. And there's some really fun images that go along with those stories and whatnot. And he says those stories might sound silly today, but no matter how silly they seem to you, many stories just like these became popular beliefs held by many people. And I thought, well, they do sound silly, but we have ones that sound just as silly today that are widely held by the majority. I mean, we're both Americans, right? And as we mentioned earlier, the United States has leaned hard into Christianity more so than it ever has even before lately, I think. And I think we're back to like puritanical days at this point. And so, I mean, our country comes to a standstill in the month of December to observe the day that a divine baby was born to a virgin. I mean, that is the same as a big guy holding the earth, and that's how the sun and the stars move, right? I mean, it's not actually any different, right? And there's, I mean, we just talked about logic and knowledge. Neither of those things connect to that. And yet it is a commonly held belief that
Mhm.
this is a thing. So yeah, those stories from long ago do sound hard to believe, but we have equally deeply cherished ones today in society and in culture that are pretty much the same level of hard to believe in my mind.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's so true. If you think about even like the Easter story, right? Like, if that were to happen today, I really doubt that people would be like, he probably resurrected from the dead. And they'd be more like, it was probably grave robbers, you
Right.
know? Like, but yet here we are, you know? So, yeah. And I think for me, so page 34 and 35, where we're talking about reading these pages, it was solid, right? It was good, and I'm following along, and I get that we're building on this idea of, religion and gods and beliefs in general. But it really got me thinking about conspiracy theories, and not the fun ones that we, like to joke about and have a good time with, like, "Oh, is Elvis still alive? Yeah, he's probably hanging out with, the mobster that's supposed to be dead," or whatever. But like the really scary, harmful ones, right? Like, I made the mistake of clicking on COVID-19 memorial plaque that was just placed, and the comments are full of people who fully believe that COVID-19 was a mass murder event perpetuated by the government. And, like, these same people think that raw milk is the only safe way to nourish young children, even though it's like the least safe way. I mean, it's like, how do you, like, we know how this works, we know how beliefs work, and we know how much people cling to beliefs that, if you actually look at them with logic and evidence, you're like, I mean, really, guys? How do you differentiate the religious ones that are like that, that are like somehow okay, with the conspiracy theory, science based ones? And how do you, how do you help make sure people don't just live a life of all kinds of harmful conspiracy theories? I don't know. I don't know. I don't have the
Yeah.
answer.
It's true. And that's become even more dangerous in this period of social media because now that you've clicked on that, you're going to get fed different things depending on which way you're commenting or which way you're reacting to that. And so that's where those biases and those belief systems get confirmed by stuff that is not knowledge, by stuff that is not evidence based. And but the more you're seeing it, the more it's implanting it and driving it in. And that's I think a huge part of how we ended up exactly where we are today. So
I know,
it is
absolutely. I mean,
definitely an issue.
hopefully I'm okay because I follow a ton of doctors and scientists and professors and researchers. And it was from like a county, like a government website. So, like hopefully I haven't totally messed up my algorithm, but it's so true. The way the algorithm works these days, you can really quickly find yourself in a position where you're just getting there are so many conspiracy theories out there right now that are so popular that I had no idea were even like, I'm sorry, what? They think
Yeah.
what now? Like, how'd that happen?
Yeah.
How did we I don't oh,
Well,
yeah.
I talked about it in our Patreon a week or so ago. It was number one on Netflix, the thing like the hunt for Osama bin Laden. And it was 3 parts. And most of it was about intelligence work and trying to find Osama bin Laden. But the first half, maybe, of the first episode was about 9/11 itself. And I still watch those things because they always share something new or a different anecdote or interview a different person about their experience that day or something like that. But I'm sitting there watching it and I was on a plane and I cried, despite the fact that I lived through 9/11. I have friends whose parents have died as a result of 9/11, whether it was at that time or now as a result of first responder related diseases and things like that. So I'm very familiar with this world. I'm from the Northeast. I'm from that area. And I cried and I'm sitting there thinking, I can't believe that there are people who think that this was done by the government as some sort of conspiracy. Like how do you believe anything? I can't. I can't watch it and just be like, how did you get to that point where you believed that?
Mhm. Yeah, I don't know. We could probably do an entire episode on conspiracy theories and just like, but how? How do they what? How? And that'd probably be like all we would like, but how? And here's another one. But how?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And he was born to a virgin, but how?
Um, I think she's telling stories. All right. So my next note was on page 37. And this, I'm curious what your take was on this. So page 37 says, as people, we create new things every day. Some creations happen when we turn what we believe into a reality that we cannot see or smell or taste or touch. These creations are still very powerful because, unlike useful inventions, they don't need to be real. They're as real as you let them be in your own mind. Some of these creations become so real, that's in quotes, they start to take on a life all their own. I have to say, when I read this, I was like, I'm totally lost. I'm sure that this is like supposed to be leading me to the next chapter, the next whatever, but like I did not get it. Now, I had a really long convo with my kiddo, with Winston, about it, and so maybe we together, mostly him, came up with a good idea of what he was trying to say here. But what do you think is like
So I thought about imaginary friends in this particular section. And
okay?
I mean, it is a cliffhanger. The end of this chapter basically says that when you've created this imaginary thing in your mind, like a superhero or something like that, that you've come up with a myth, and myth is our first chapter that we'll talk about next week. So I think it is leading us there for sure. But I kind of came up with something like an imaginary best friend or something like that. And they can become very, very real, or not even an imaginary best friend. I mean, I know he said here something that you can't use the senses to see and touch and all that kind of stuff. But like my youngest has kind of grown out of it now, but which made me really, really sad. But he had this stuffed puppy, and Puppy was alive to him for a really long time. Puppy had feelings, and Puppy needed care and all that. I mean, in his world, Puppy was 100% alive. And so that's kind of where I went with this was you can build that up. And it's part of the reason that I'm really sad now that Puppy lives on a shelf and he doesn't have that same thing anymore. Because, like, in my mind, I'm like, Puppy must be sad because he's been like retired on a shelf. I mean, he was like one of my kids for so many years. I mean, we were camping one summer, which was like our jam. We would always go out in our camper van and go out west and whatnot. We were driving one day and these clouds were coming in, and we were in an area where we knew it was going to be a very violent storm or a tornado or something. You could tell from the sky. So I pulled into a gas station, and we went into the gas station building, figuring it would be safer than being in the van. And some other people were doing something similar. They were all kind of seeking shelter in the store area of the gas station, right? And Liam brought Puppy in with him because if the van was going to get taken away in a tornado, Puppy couldn't go with it, obviously. And some point in the gas station, he had set him down, which shocked me because they were so glued together. And I wasn't with him. He was standing with my older son, and I was standing with my daughter. We were all just kind of looking at stuff and waiting to see what happened with the storm. And he let out this blood curdling scream at one point that I literally thought he was being kidnapped by somebody, because I've always told them, like, you know, you kick, you bite, you scream, like everything. And he realized he had set Puppy down, and that was the blood curdling scream. To him, that was that level of connection. And so I thought, yeah, you can see where people create these deities in their minds, and they have this full backstory and they have this full personality, and they've done all these amazing things, and you have this amazing connection to them the way he and Puppy did. And so, or an imaginary friend might, or something. So that's where I went with it. What'd you guys come up with?
Well, again, it was not me for the most part, but I was told to think of it as like where you might dream about, whether you're sleeping or just daydreaming about being like the best race car driver in the world. And that thing, like in that case, you know that it's not real, but you had fun thinking about it and imagining that you were. But then you could have the other end of it where you have conspiracy theory. We had talked about that fear. There are people who believe that all of the Democrat politicians have been taken over by like lizard people, and they're like
Right.
wearing human skin suits or something,
Yes.
and that like they have made this up in their head with like no, like there's no proof, there's nothing you can see or whatever, but like they have this belief, and like they firmly believe that that's the reality. And so that was what my kiddo thought was what he was trying to encompass with this page. And I was like, okay, I suppose I could see that. Your analogy is good too. We had an imaginary friend for a long time in our home. And so, yeah, I guess I can see that, that like, it's not real, but there's a lot of, making sure there's an extra plate for Jesse and making sure Jesse's comfortable on the road trip and those kinds of things where you blur that line a bit.
Yeah,
So,
I
yeah.
can see that.
Okay.
I
Yeah.
think too, based upon Winston's too, have you ever had a dream where you wake up and you're like, did that really happen? Because it feels so real that you
Yeah.
can't tell if it really happened or if you dreamt it. And
So where
so,
you're still mad at your husband the next day because of what he did in your dream. He's like, but I didn't do it. Like, you did. I
yeah,
feel it in my soul. So just,
yes. And I reserve the right to be pretty pissed off about it until I'm done, right? No, I 100%. I had that maybe like 2 years ago, and I was so pissed. And the next day I kept in my own head. I didn't even tell him what happened. I was just being a bitch for no reason. And the next day I'm like, oh my gosh, like I would catch myself and I'd be like, stop being a bitch. He didn't actually do that thing. Like, oh my God, but I couldn't stop. I was so pissed. So yeah, I got it. Well, we'll
So
have to see where the author is taking us with myths next week when we resume our reading, because he's leading us somewhere, because everything else has been like a little breadcrumb trail. So this one likely is too. Hopefully we'll get a little bit more clarity when we resume reading.
yeah. Yeah, that's my thing. I have had this book for quite a while. I bought the whole series a while ago. We were gonna read it together. It didn't happen because, as we've discussed, read alouds don't go well in our home. So I'm happy that we're finally reading it. I truly wish we'd read it years ago. I feel like it's laying a really solid foundation for much bigger, deeper discussions. I'm hopeful that we're gonna get at least like a kid level discussion in this book and the next couple of books. But I'm pretty optimistic that it's laying the foundation for some really intense conversations after we're done with these books.
I'll be excited to see. It'll be good. I'll have to toss
Yeah.
it to my kids to read too. I mean, full disclosure, I downloaded the book this morning, so we haven't even had a chance to go there. It was like I read it, and then one of my kids had a pediatrician appointment, and then I came back and we're recording. So I haven't even had a chance to digest with them or suggest it to any of them or anything like that. But they are all very skeptical in the words of religion, especially having lived most of their lives in the Bible Belt and seeing some pretty out there stuff going on. So I'll be keen to hear their thoughts as well. It should be good. But yeah.
Yeah.
Well, if you enjoy our content, we would be so, so grateful if you, wherever you are, would just like this particular episode, follow this channel, share it with a friend who you think might like it, comment if that function exists wherever you are listening. It helps us grow the podcast. It helps us reach new people. Secular and progressive homeschoolers do exist. There's more of us than we think there are. We just haven't really figured out a way to congeal ourselves quite as much as the religious homeschoolers have. They have church as their sticking point, and we're all kind of out there just floating in the ether. So the more we can kind of connect and find one another and put out a bat signal for other secular and progressive homeschoolers, the better off we all are, because we build community. So if you are willing to like, follow, share, comment, etc., it just, in the algorithm world, helps spread the word a little bit more, helps give us a little boost, and we appreciate it. So thank you so much. But
Yeah.
we hope you've taken something from this week's episode, and we can't wait to continue the conversation with you next week.
Yeah, absolutely. And in the meantime, happy homeschooling.
Have an awesome day.